It's quite rare in NBA history where you can ask a crazy question like, what if we brought together 4 players who averaged 20 points per game the season before and put them on the same team and have that question answered as a reality? The 2004 Lakers were one of the most hyped up yet disappointing teams of all time. Well, the truth behind why this team failed is complex, in the sense that it was a combination of factors, some of which are bad luck, like injuries, but others an inevitable result from personality clashes and age-related decline. In today's video, we'll explore the true reasons as to why this team, with 4 Hall of Famers, failed to win the championship. What's up guys, my name is Mark. I think the proper way to start off this video is to talk about Karl Malone and Gary Payton, the 2 newcomers to the team. Now, like I mentioned before, both Karl Malone and Gary Payton did indeed average 20 points per game the season before. Payton doing it at age 34 and Karl Malone doing it at age 39. First off, let's just acknowledge how incredible that is. 20 points per game at age 39, and he played 81 games that season. Unbelievable. Now, of course, when you bring Payton and Malone in to be the 3rd and 4th option next to Kobe and Shaq, nobody's expecting them to keep up those numbers. And they didn't. Both Malone and Payton suffered drop-offs in their per-game averages. Most of it the consequence of not having the ball in their hands as much and mostly deferring shots to the better players on the team. Nothing surprising here. The Lakers ran out to a 19-5 start to the season, but in their 25th game, Karl Malone suffered a right knee injury that would keep him out for at least a couple of months. Not only did this injury hamper Karl Malone physically, it also damaged him psychologically, because Karl Malone, despite being 40 years old, had never suffered a major injury before this knee sprain. It's crazy, but it's true. I mean, this guy never missed more than 2 games in a season before this happened. There's a reason the NBA pays for its injured athletes to talk to therapists. It's because there is extensive medical literature on the mental effects a physical injury can have on a professional athlete. Karl Malone had never dealt with a major injury as a pro athlete, and as his teammate Gary Payton said, quote, "Karl had never been hurt in his career, and it was a devastating injury that he couldn't deal with. He had never missed that many games in his life." And when people talk about the 2004 Lakers, I think many forget just how important Karl Malone was to this team. Sure, he was at best the 3rd option, and on paper, 13 points per game doesn't seem like a crazy, irreplaceable production, but that doesn't take into consideration his leadership off the court and his leadership on the court. About his leadership off the court, Luke Walton, who that season was a rookie, had this to say. Quote, "Karl was as good of a teammate as I've ever had. He was funny, he was hardworking, he was all about what was best for the team, offering advice to the young guys, hanging out with all the different groups of the older guys. When he got hurt, not having him out there being an anchor, you just noticed something left the team." About his leadership on the court, Gary Payton had this to say. Quote, "All of a sudden, Karl got hurt. He was controlling our offense. He was running that triangle, making us more comfortable, especially myself." And Karl's role in the triangle offense is also expressed in some of the numbers as well. Although Karl's numbers across the board dipped from his career averages, the one category for him that didn't decrease were his assists per game. Malone had the ball in his hands a surprising amount of time, but he was just much more focused on running the system and making the right passes than he was getting his own shot. At the same time Malone got injured, Kobe was undergoing trials for being accused of sexual assault. Now, I'm not gonna dive too deep into the case itself. I could make an entire video talking about what actually happened. But because of the trials, Kobe himself was required to constantly fly in and out of Colorado, where the trials occurred. Whether fair or not, this definitely affected Kobe's performance on certain nights, and it affected the team's cohesion as a whole. Many nights, Phil Jackson himself had no idea if Kobe was going to be available, if he would make it back from Colorado in time for the game and whatnot. More so, the media coverage on the Lakers became almost exclusively about Kobe's trials, and when they weren't talking about Kobe's trials, they were talking about Kobe and Shaq's feud, which by 2004 had escalated to its all-time height, including one instance where, quote, "Shaq threatened to murder Kobe," end quotes, and someone had to pull them apart. In addition to Kobe and Shaq and Karl Malone being out, the other role players on the team were also undergoing issues. Rick Fox, who was the 5th starter on this team, was recovering from a torn ligament in his foot the season prior. Derek Fisher, according to himself, had a hard time accepting that he was no longer the starting point guard since Gary Payton had took over that role, something that became even more important to Fisher since it was a contract year. Speaking of contract years, Shaq himself had contract issues with Lakers management. Shaq was looking for a max dollar contract extension, but Lakers owner Dr. Buss refused to give it to Shaq, who at the time was 32 years of age. It seemed like almost everyone on the Lakers was fighting their own battle. Instead of the battle on the courts, they were brought together to fight. Like Derek Fisher said, we were a collection of very accomplished and high-achieving individuals. Even though we had a really good core and a nucleus of guys who had been there for a few years already, we weren't a team. Nonetheless, after Karl Malone's absence, in which the Lakers went 22-17, Malone came back and the Lakers ended the season going 14-4. They handled the Rockets in the first round, beat the defending champion San Antonio Spurs in 6 in the second round, and in the conference finals they beat the Timberwolves in 6 games, who were led by MVP Kevin Garnett, who had just beaten the Sacramento Kings in their second round matchup. After defeating 2 great teams in a row, there was still a lot of confidence on the part of the Lakers. The fans and media certainly did too, as the Lakers entered the finals as heavy favorites to win it against the Detroit Pistons. Now, we can go on and on talking about this series, diving into the film on what the Pistons did and what the Lakers did that caused the Pistons to beat the Lakers in just 5 games. Here, I'm going to steal Reddit user DreamX's 5-point summary on what happened, because I think this person does a great job, honestly better than I could, of summarizing really what happened that made the Pistons beat the Lakers in 5 games. So, factor number 1, the Pistons had a Shaq plan, meaning that they had a way to defend Shaq. For the most part, they would let Ben Wallace handle him one-on-one. Occasionally, they would have Rasheed Wallace come in double once Shaq caught the ball. When Wallace was off the floor, Eldon Campbell would come in as a very physical defender who fouled Shaq a lot. And obviously, putting Shaq at the free throw line was not something that scared the Pistons. Ben Wallace was strong enough for the most part to keep Shaq a certain distance from the basket. I would also like to add something to this, which I think one of the most underrated parts about what made Shaq so difficult to guard was also the fact that it was so tiring to guard him. I mean, you basically had this 300-pound human literally leaning against you, and you had to stick close to him because you had to make it difficult for him to catch the ball. By the fourth quarter, most people would be completely exhausted from just Shaq leaning on them. But Ben Wallace, who might have been the most well-conditioned center at the time, I mean, look at this guy. This conditioning, coupled with his competitive desire, made it so that he never got as tired as other people who tried to defend Shaq. He obviously didn't shut down Shaq, but Shaq was a lot less dominant in the 2004 finals than he was in the previous 3 finals that he played in. Reason number 2. Karl Malone's injury. In the regular season, we had already seen the Lakers struggle with Karl Malone out of the lineup. Malone played hurt for the entire final series. By game 3, he was limited to 20 minutes per game, and after game 4, he was too hurt to play in game 5. Matching up against a legendary defense, the Lakers needed all the firepower they could get, and especially Karl Malone to keep the offense flowing. Which brings us to reason number 3, and that's Kobe's poor shot selection. Kobe for this series shot 38% from the field, and part of that was a young Tayshaun Prince playing very good defense on Kobe and forced him into a lot of these tough shots. There most likely was also some personal motivation behind why Kobe didn't feed Shaq the ball more, since Shaq was still putting up 26 points per game on 63% shooting, and this is where it seems like the Kobe-Shaq feud really had a significant effect on the Lakers' performance on the court. Reason number 4, lack of depth. Without Karl Malone, the Lakers had almost no playmaking outside of Kobe and Shaq. Gary Payton, the supposed 4th star on the team, took just 6 shot attempts per game. The Lakers didn't have Robert Horry anymore. You only had a really old Rick Fox, who was getting really old. Derek Fisher and Kareem Rush were both shooting under 40% for the entire playoffs. Not only were these stars not as effective as they once were, the support system around them crashed. Reason number 5. The Lakers' poor defense. Nobody could play lockdown defense outside of Kobe. The man once known as the Glove had regressed dramatically on defense as a 35-year-old. Neither him nor Derek Fisher could stay in front of Chauncey Billups, who ended up winning Finals MVP. The Lakers traditionally like to funnel everything towards Shaq in the paint on defense, and the Pistons ran plays directly countering this strategy by pulling Shaq out to contest jumpers or take advantage of his slow feet in pick and roll. So there you go, the 2004 Lakers, truly one of the most talented teams of all time, but also why they ultimately failed. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like. Go check out the Swish Factor NBA podcast, which is a podcast I run with a friend of mine, where we just talk about everything NBA. Go check that out. The links will be in the description down below. But other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.